Welcome to episode 91 of the XRM Toolcast. In this episode, Scott and I speak with Julian Sharp, a fellow MVP, about his study groups that he runs for the Microsoft certification exams. We also talk about how his true feelings are when it comes to flow and logic apps, and even get into why he loves how goals stayed in the sales exam until recently. So if you haven't ever taken a study group with Julian and you need to take an exam, boy, is this the episode for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the XRM Toolcast. With me, your host, Daryl, always raising the bar, and Scott. His voice even sounds better now because mine sounds horrible. Daryl, Scott, how's it going?
Very good, thanks, Daryl. How are you doing? I mean,
I'm getting over some sort of throat thing, so it's a challenge at times. But yeah, the good thing is I don't feel sick. I just have a sore throat. And
it sounds good. You know, they say when when your throat starts to go and your nose gets bunged up, it's a good radio voice. You know, it kind of adds like natural compression to your voice. You know?
Yeah, I don't think that's true, but that's okay. It's okay. We'll
that's what they say. It makes you feel a little better. You know, that's all. Well, it's this just happens to the best of us. So have you been off work then? Have you just been chilling out and?
My throat's sore, not my fingers.
You're always raising the bar, and also you've got a very high bar, obviously, for having time off work.
Yes, I have a very high bar for certain things. An uncluttered background is not one of them. You do very well with your background, man. Just about 4 cases worth of hot chocolate sitting back there if you look closely enough. So.
You can never have enough hot chocolate, really.
That's all. It's all for the mochas. Poor man.
Yeah, well, I've got my coffee here, and I'm being careful not to get it all over my beard. And talking of beards,
our guest today, we brought him in for the beard, but he'll stay for the other conversations, is Julian Sharp, solution architect, trainer, MCT, MVP, speaker, and author at Ready 365, which sounds like a football call out. Mm-hmm. Ready 365. Julian Sharp. Julian, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, now, our listeners that don't know you may not know that you have a very impressive beard. How long does that take? How many years is that beard here?
I've been wearing the beard about 4 years, but I did shave it off at the beginning of COVID lockdown. That I had to shave off, see what it looked like, and I didn't recognise myself, and I quickly grew it back.
I remember seeing you without your beard, Julian, right? And I swear, a few months later, I saw you, and you had exactly the same beard as you had now. I mean, like, either it's like a prosthetic stick-on beard, or you've got an amazing growth kind of.
It does grow quickly. It is excessive.
Well, before the show, you were telling me it was out of control. So I guess that's.
It needs a bit of tidying. It's not as long as it has been. It was halfway down here, a few inches longer.
Well, I think it's awesome. I think it is absolutely awesome.
It's more of a trademark now. I can't get rid of it.
I believe that. I believe that. Yeah. I can't
ZZ Top. They could never get rid of their beard, right? Because it would just be.
Yeah, not them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everyone has to have a trademark.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Daryl, you need to do the intro thing, right? Because you started talking about football, and Julian and I were just like, well, football. I mean, like American football.
Yes, American football. Yes. Well, I mean, so. Today's show, the topic for today's show is not about beards, although if it was, Julian would be well representing here. No, so the I guess probably what I think you're most known for, maybe there's other things that are missing, is your use of study groups, and you run all these study groups for people that are studying for all these exams. So why don't we start back with how long have you been doing this, and how do people get involved?
I've started about three 3 years ago, I think. I just thought an idea, getting people together to study for one of the exams especially around the new fundamentals that just been released, to get people into the Power Platform and dynamics. And I thought, okay, let's give it a go and see what happens. And it's proved really popular. And I got quite a lot of interest, so probably up to about 100 people at a time. From all, and I was quite surprised, it's worldwide. I have people from Australia, from Canada, from America, all over really. And it's all grown. It's not really grown. The numbers are still similar. But
yeah. So if no one's ever been to one of these study groups, or they may be planning to, what can they expect? What's the normal format?
The format's varied depending on the type of exam. The classic one, which I've used a lot, is we meet twice a week, typically Thursday evenings GMT and Sunday mornings 8 a.m. So 8 a.m., 8 p.m. to allow people to go from different time zones. And we run it on Teams, and you decide to join up. And I typically talk through a particular part of the exam. So we look at the exam objectives. That's where we start. And we just go through, let's take a set of objectives. We talk through maybe our demo, get questions, maybe throw a few questions at people, like how it works. And just try to cover the topics in the exam. And then it's recorded. So we do it all on Teams, do lots of links to all the learn material to docs, so we get demos and try it out. That's the classic sort of model. But I've done a number of different exams. So I've done fundamentals, we've done Azure, I've done AI. I'm currently doing the RPA, the Power Platform RPA, the PL500. We've got one more session on Sunday, and that finishes. So that's been more of a classic where I've talked through what I've just described. But I've done others where I've had guest presenters. So for the Power BI, I got different people to do different sections. And again, that's part for them to learn how to present. Yeah. It's not just learning. And other ones I've done where I've not really presented. I've got people to talk and try and get more interactive. Because I don't want it to just be being talking and presenting. And try to get it. But it's hard to get everybody. People are still reluctant to speak up in meetings online. So you end up with the same few people if you're not careful. And there's too many people willing to sit back, and they're still not willing to put on the camera like we are now. They're not willing to speak up. So
I suppose it depends on the number of people.
Yeah, but we generally have around 40 plus each session, and it varies because not everybody can get up in the middle of the night. So typically people do 1 in 2 because of the time zones. Some people do all of them. Even after Summit, we actually had one on the day after the Scottish Summit. So 8 a.m. after the Scottish Summit, there were a number of hungover people who joined. And I thought that was very commendable of them.
Yeah, that shows serious commitment. That really does. And I think it also is a testimony to the quality of the content you're putting out there. People really want to get up and go to it. So that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I do a lot of other things as well, but this is mainly my sort of main thing that I do. I do about 3 or 4 of them a year, depending on how busy I am and what's going on. Because we do about 10 sessions, so it's about a couple of months, or maybe shorter, longer, depending on the type of exam. So it's quite a bit of a commitment for people to come on. And I try and do it twice a week to get them involved.
So what's the ask of people, Julian? What's the ask? What do you say? Hey, in order for you to join this, do this.
I don't really ask them to lot. I'll ask them to turn up. I ask them to take part as they can and ask questions, because the more people ask questions, the better it is for everybody else. Because I had a really good question we did last night. I had a really good question. It's something that I knew I just really hadn't brought out. And it's a really crucial bit of information about, I can't remember what it was now, but it was a really, really important topic, getting people to think and talk. I do get quite a lot of people in the chat, so they'll chat in Teams rather in the text rather than speak verbally. I do like them to take the exam. I'm not going to do this just for things. I want them to take the exam. I want to see them get the results. Because I think it can make a difference.
Do you keep track of pass rates?
No, because I don't get it. Not everybody says anything. I ought to, yes.
Yes,
that should be nice. And a nice statistic to have. It's like join our study group, and you've got an 80% chance of passing your.
I don't want to say that because I don't want to. I try not to be exam prep, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to explain in broader terms, like for instance the RPA Power Platform desktop. I'm trying to talk about how you really do it and what's really truly involved. So for me, I use the exam objectives as really a starting point, and I want to talk about the bigger picture. So it's not just exam. I want them to pass more. I was
going to ask you exactly about that. Is that in terms of a lot of these exams, you look at the syllabus, and the syllabus is usually very high level, and unless you've actually had experience in using those products, doing those kind of things, the syllabus really doesn't give you an insight into actually how it works for real. A lot of the time. And so I was going to ask, how detailed do you go into in terms of experience and in terms of actually being able to use these products for real rather than just using them, understanding them enough to be able to take the exam?
Yeah, so let's talk about the Power Automate desktop, which is the PL500, what we're doing right now. The actual objectives in the exam are actually really vague. They don't. You get these bullet points. It's like, how deep do you need to go on those? And even the documentation that Microsoft has is very variable, and the Power Automate desktop is actually not detailed enough. So I do try and talk around the bigger topics. What's the real issues? And I sort of get a sense sometimes from the objectives, what they're really trying to get at. It's very much around the modern Microsoft exams, which they have this idea of role-based certifications. It's about doing the job. It's very much about how to do things. It's not like exams in the past where you had to understand too deeply. And I think that's something we've noticed. But I still want people to understand. I want them to go that little bit deeper. It's not about just knowing the facts and knowing. I want them to actually get it. So I spent, not last session before, we talked about AI Builder, which is in that exam. But I ended up talking about machine learning in general and AI and what's Azure Cognitive Services. And I'd start talking about, well, which should you use? Because you can use AI Builder. I can use the connectors to Azure Cognitive Services. The Azure Cognitive Services don't have a connector. I can create a custom connector for. And also in Power Automate Desktop, it has its own connections into Cognitive Services, has its own Cognitive Services connections. Which would I use? So I talk about when's the most appropriate use for this, because you've got that choice. And therefore you need to understand the pros and cons of each. So I try and get into that a little bit more.
That sounds really valuable.
Rather than just saying, these are the AI Builder models. Yeah, you can do this, this, and this. I have a slide with that on, but I'll talk a lot more about things. I'm really quite, and I also talk about, it even comes bring your own model. That's actually in the exam objectives. It's the bring your own model. Don't know if you know about that. You can build a model in Azure Machine Learning and bring it into AI Builder. It's really cool. And then just consume it in an app or a flow. Yeah, that's in there, which I find a bit bizarre, to be honest, but could be useful.
So when people are joining your study groups, do you find that their only real goal is to pass the exam, or do you find that there are a lot of people who are joining because they want to do those role-based types of jobs that you were just talking about?
I think I think a lot of it is credential. I mean, there's an issue with credentialism, I think, worldwide, not just in the IT industry, about getting your badges, getting your credentials. So there is that, and I do accept that. But I do get people. I've had people join pretty much every session, every one I've done. They've come through a whole series, and I've had actually people going right from the beginning. People who are just getting into the Power Platform on the Power Platform fundamentals, who now are working inside the Power Platform, and some of them have gone on to do some great things. I get other people who just want to learn. They want to know more about this. They know the Power Platform, so I get a number of people. Clearly, I've got a guy from Denmark who comes to loads of them, even though he runs the practice for the partner he works for him. So he comes in just to learn. He's not necessarily interested in certifications. So it's a mixture, but I do recognise that a lot of people just come for the exam tips.
Now, do you have a full, solid understanding of everything you're covering, or do you go in like I'm just figuring this out as I go? Like how do you do that? Because I was a professor, or an adjunct professor for a year, and I taught like intro to web development, and that was super easy. I just what I want to speak on, great, I'll speak on that. And then the second semester, I had to do computer organization design, which is like ones and zeros. And, I hadn't touched like ones and zeros since I graduated. So that was a really, really difficult class to teach because I'm learning just ahead of teaching. So how do you handle that?
It's a mixture. I mean, some of them, the fundamentals, that's not really an issue. Yeah, I know that pretty well. But this one with the Power Platform, Power Automate Desktop, I thought I knew it before I got into it. And started thinking, what do I need to say? And I found myself doing a lot more and digging in and learning. So I actually do this for my own purposes, so I know what's involved in it. It's my learning. And I always say when I'm doing, because I teach as well, I've been teaching Dynamics 365 ERP fundamentals today. Even though I do teach that because it's high level. I find I learn from my students. And the same I learn back from my study groups. About what I'm saying, or are they understanding the concepts I'm trying to get over? So, this one I did actually have to do a lot of preparation. Originally I have to set out, okay, what am I going to cover each week or each session? And I have to really think, and it actually took me a long time this time to do that. And just work out what we were going to cover. And I had to we talked about, Scott mentioned the skills measured, figure out what they actually were. I looked at this, what does this mean? Let's go have a look. Let's go try this out and see what's involved. So there's a lot of prep, but again, it increases my skill level doing it, which is one of the reasons I do it.
Yeah, because you're effectively attending your own classes as well. So, but like one step ahead, you're always trying to get that extra planning and that extra insight into things. So, I would say that your accumulated knowledge must be just amazing. As awesome as your beard, if not more awesome.
I do think we're getting to the stage now. I mean, before I did Dynamics CRM, I used to do Siebel. If anybody knows Siebel from a long, long time ago. And Siebel got to the point where it was too big to know everything. And I think we're at that stage now with the Power Platform. You need to choose what to specialise. Yeah, I think we are. I think for us to have been around it for a long time.
That was 5 years ago.
No, I don't know. I think Scott and I, we've been around this. I mean, I've been around since CRM 1.2. So you get to know some of the things. I think it's now hitting that limit. I don't touch Power Pages. That's not me. I know enough to talk about it for 5 minutes. That's it. I don't know. Yeah.
And you're not Canadian.
And I'm not Canadian. Yeah, that really rules me out on that one. Yeah, so I think we're getting that situation now. So you have to focus. And actually on this, I'm actually seeing people focus on Power Automate a lot. Especially, I don't know if it's in Canada, but in Europe, I'm seeing people whose job is Power Automate. And I think it's a huge opportunity for people.
It's very interesting that evolution of a technology platform, such that it's now the Power Platform. Constantly new functionality is being added, constantly new areas are being added, such that no longer can you be able to understand everything. I think that's a really important message to give people when they're first starting out on the Power Platform, because it's very easy just to get overwhelmed because you see all these kind of things. And so do you recommend to people that they do just pick one area to specialize in after they've done those fundamentals, or how do you recommend people decide on where they want to specialize?
It's been interesting because I've seen people go, which I thought would be going to more Power Apps, end up in Power BI. Because they found that they could do something, they found they enjoy that, they found their own analytics side. And I know it's useful to have a bit of everything, but you just can't know everything in enough detail. Power BI, I like to talk about Power BI especially. It's a great tool because you can get started really easily. anybody can create a report which looks nice from your set of data. But then you go to the next level. You say, I need to start getting a data model. I need to get data in. I need to start understanding the model, building some measures, and then building some reports from that. That's one layer. And then you discover there's another layer there. And there's more and more power the more you do. And that's what I really love about Power BI. It takes you through that journey. I think we don't have that necessarily with the rest of the Power Platform. I think Power Automate's like this. You can create a simple flow, but a flow goes from very simple to very complex very quickly. You have to get into expressions and they're horrible. Well, how do I do this trigger body thing again? And you go,
I've got a note. I've got a text document that on my desktop for the a load of DAX queries and a load of Power Apps queries.
Yeah,
expressions.
I have as well. I call it my flow tips and tricks, and like how do I little text file. And I lost it the other day. I couldn't find it.
Oh.
Oh no!
Yeah, I found it again. I put it somewhere. I forgot where I put it. And yeah, I think it is. I think it's more of a challenge the more we go, more functionality. I mean, for instance, I don't really do Power Virtual Agents either. Even though in the past, going back about 5-6 years ago, I used to build bots with Azure Bot Framework. So I understand the theory, the technology, and all the terminology. I've just never really done a lot of PVA bots, mainly because of the licensing.
We had we had Danny Cahill on the show a few weeks back, and he creates these awesome cheat sheets to give you this sort of overview, all of the kind of things that you need on a regular basis. So maybe you could hook up with him and sort of refer people to those cheat sheets, because or if there is a gap, maybe you could sort of collaborate and bring your little notepad documents in and maybe create a cheat sheet.
Yeah, a little cheat sheet study session where you keep on adding cheat sheets together and working on it.
Yeah, but I'd want other people to contribute then. I don't want it to be me telling people. I want them to contribute back. But I think that's the challenge I have. Again, I think it's changed as well. I think in the middle of lockdown, it was much more collaborative. People had the time, I think, to spend. Now it seems to switch back to everybody's busy again. Let's just do the information. I mean, this session's been quite good. It's with the same few people talking and discussing. The vast majority are still sitting there and just absorbing. That's probably a better word for it.
Just absorbing,
And that doesn't count those that are listening afterwards.
Yeah, and I do record them because we have people, so it's all recorded. There's lots of little notes. I do upload my slides, which are just really the key points. Points to videos. Actually, I found a really good. There's a really good set of Power Automate desktop videos on YouTube the other day. Anders Jensen, I'll give him a shout out. And he's come, I think, from the UiPath world into Power Automate desktop. So he has quite a different take on it because he's been doing automation for years, and him and Sophia, they've got a really good set of videos on Power Automate desktop. And he also runs a LinkedIn group and a Facebook group, and I think he's got a Discord server as well.
Is that all?
Maybe we can ask him if he wants to come on the show. That would be awesome to talk to him. It's nice to hear a different take on anything, really.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing we see. I don't know about you, Darryl, but are you from Dynamics CRM background? Or was that how you got into
2011?
Yeah.
That's when I started. Yep.
Yeah. So we have a particular view on the world, don't we? Which is very data-centric, probably. And so, but a lot of people coming in now are coming from other products and have a different thought process on it. I mean, originally I go back to study groups. I actually did it because getting new starters into the Power Platform. That was the original goal, to get new people in, get people started on this, and just give them a bit of confidence. That was the original idea, but it has expanded from that. And I tried to get my wife involved. She's actually a couple of years, a year or so beforehand. Anna Demony ran a little group for women to get into Dynamics, and she took part in that. And she's got the dynamic sales, the older dynamic sales and the customization and the installation and deployment exams. But even then, she found it quite hard to get employment because everybody wanted somebody with experience. I think it has changed now. I think there's a lot more. I'm also taking part in the Power Up program. Do you know about that? That's a Microsoft-sponsored program to get people in. That's just kicked off this week, I think. I'm going to be running app in a day on that in a couple of weeks' time. That's again trying to get people in. And then we've got things like Trisha's Power
careers.
Platform. Yeah. And then we've got the Power Platform School, which Trisha's organised. There's a number of different initiatives to try and get people in. Mine is just one of those.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to do back to fundamentals again, because I've gone off to a more, I think, a harder one, and I'm going to go back to the beginner level. But I've done Azure Fundamentals, Dynamics Fundamentals, Power Platform Fundamentals, and then I've done a couple more of the harder ones. This is a harder one.
So a lot of our listeners, I think it may be in double figures now. I'm not sure, but the
I record them in Roman numeral. We never know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that a lot of them are very much from a development background, from a dev, obviously XRM tool, CAST, we're XRM Toolbox focused originally. And would you have any advice to people who are in that kind of pro dev space, reasons why they should sort of maybe broaden their horizons to other aspects of the platform?
Well, I don't really count myself as a developer, but I write code. I write and I write JavaScript. And
you play one on TV.
Yeah, so I'll do a bit of everything. So I wouldn't really call myself a hardcore developer, but I write plugins, I write JavaScript. But I tend to write stuff around. I tend to use Azure Functions a lot. And what I like to talk about, especially around the Power Platform, is using Azure to extend the Power Platform. I think that's where we can make a difference. Where using for a long time, I've used Azure a lot for a long time to do integrations with Service Bus and Logic Apps, and I've more recently, probably the last 2-3 years, done more Azure Functions and calling those, say, HTTP triggers or whatever. And I've even got into Cosmos DB to store my data now. So I think for pro devs, I think you need to straddle this, especially in Power Platform, learn a bit more about Azure and how we can leverage Azure to make the platform better, to do the things and package them up for other people to do. So it's really that Fusion Teams thing that Microsoft did. I've been talking about this for, I think, probably 18 months before Microsoft started on it. How to really use that Azure services. And when you start getting into that, you can start extending more. When you look at things like PVA, there's not really much you can extend, but you get into Power Automate and the ability to do HTTP calls out to things and trigger those. Again, I'm very much into writing custom APIs now as well. If I'm doing integrations, create a nice little interface and then I can call that from my Azure to hook it in. So if you're not into custom APIs, I advise you to get into those. I know you probably do those, do you, Scott?
Yeah, they're very, very useful. Yeah,
both for getting data pushed in and also allowing people to suck out. I've built ones to allow people to an external. It was a Moodle site actually to pull data out, but I wanted to control which records, which columns they wanted, which if you just give people normal access to the APIs, the web API, they can do what they like, can't they? I really want to say they're going to get this subset of records and this, which it wasn't. I could have done it with security to effectively add in queries and control what they got to see, and I actually did them. And I also changed I reshaped the data as well because I didn't want to see the structure of the data underneath.
Yeah, and being able to call them from a Power Automate Cloud Flow as well. Yeah, that's really neat because then you've got an integration point that allows you to be very consistent and control, like you say, control exactly what you're interacting with.
I remember on a project years ago, CM 2011, where we had a web developer reading and writing directly into Dynamics at the time. And we found what we found is after 6 months of running. We were running 100% CPU because this was we were hosting it. We were running like 100% CPU at like 3 a.m. in the morning. We couldn't figure out why. And when we actually looked at, I started looking at the SQL queries coming through, the web developer, what he did is every 2 hours, he was updating the contact record, even if it hadn't changed. He had no change tracking in the system. So every 2 hours, he just sent everything. And do you know how he fixed the problem? He deleted all the contacts on his system. That's he said, I've solved this. Because it was hurting performance, because it was kicking off loads of workflows. So he deleted all. I realised this after, because like 3-4 months later, we started seeing the CPU ramping up again at like 3 a.m. in the morning. Nobody's in the system, hitting huge amounts of CPU. So what I did in the end is I created a table, which just had all the fields in it, and I said, and I gave him access. You write to this table, and I'll then do plugins to decide if I need to update the real tables. And that was really an API layer, but that's all I could do at the time. But that really solved my problem, because I could basically ignore 90% of his updates, because they were. I didn't have they changed the data or not? Because if you update a record the same amount, it triggers it. Dynamics or Dataverse will take it as you've changed it, even if it hasn't changed the value. Annoying.
Yeah, I did a lot of work in my recent project along those lines, where it was giving me all this data in some horrible JSON format, and I would just go retrieve the data out of CRM and then do a compare, just do a compare to see had anything changed when I started, and if it did, I would just update the required fields. Because there's been lots of times where I see people, something's changed, I'll just update everything on the record, and it triggers 20 flows and 13 workflows and 18 different plugins, and then we get all this attention, and just because someone didn't take the time to go through and only update what actually needed to be updated. So.
I had that on an ISV solution you may have worked on as well, Peppermint, where when you reopened a case, they had a plugin that updated all the columns on the case. It kicked off so much workflow. And sent emails out to customers. It was like we had to explain the problem to the ISV and get them to change it. But of course, we had to wait for them to release it, and there's nothing we could do. Yeah, that was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. And not only the updates that it's triggering, you could have a stale version of the data too, and so you could be overriding something that you don't need to be overriding, and you're losing stuff. Yeah, so that's another issue. Totally.
And if you're triggering Power Automate cloud flows, then there's licensing implications and all sorts of things like that. Yeah. You don't want to be on a pay-as-you-go kind of.
I think I managed to. We were importing some. I think we did I can't remember what happened. We managed to trigger some like 400,000 cloud flows in less than an hour, and completely burnt through our quota for the whole month.
Wow.
That's if you've got pay-as-you-go. That's where you want a subscription limit firmly in place.
If you don't know what's in place and what isn't until you hit it, that's the problem I have now.
Yeah,
which is good and bad, right? You don't want to know everything, but sometimes you do.
You hear these horror stories of people getting an Azure bill for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and just because something went rogue and suddenly did a load of updates that triggered so many different things.
With that, on all my Azure subscriptions, I set up quotas, I set up alerts. It's not difficult to do, but most people don't think about it. But Microsoft are pretty forgiving.
We had a $65,000 Cosmos DB bill for my last project for our stage environment. It wasn't even production for our stage environment in 1 month. And
how do you manage that?
Eventually, we end up. I'd never used Cosmos DB before. Somebody that supposedly knew how it was supposed to be done, like, we're just going to do this. And it was horrible. Like every single, there wasn't any caching. He was just retrieving everything and updating everything, and giant, 10,000 line JSON blobs he's sticking everywhere and duplicating everything. And we ended up throwing Cosmos away, just putting it all in SQL as a workaround to not have to have so much cost to it. And we definitely drove the cost down a whole bunch, but it was just, I'm glad the project's over.
Cosmos is one of those things that can get expensive if you're not careful.
And we were not.
So did you have to pay that $65,000 yourself, Daryl?
Not me, luckily. The company I was working for, I think they did chime in for the first month. Then I think the second month, I think they said, no, that one's on you guys. But it was it's crazy.
Bit of a surprise. But yeah, I mean, it's those kind of things, I suppose, in your study groups that are real gold dust. Having those little nuggets of information that can actually go an awfully long way when you start using these products for real.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did have a discussion about limits. We had a discussion on the RPA one about cloud flows and limits and how often they run. And because from my view, Power Automate is great, except the monitoring is awful. So if you have hundreds of flow runs running a day, it's impossible to manage. So I ended up with a discussion about cloud flows versus logic apps and what you should use when. And pretty much, I'm still a fan of logic apps. They're great, and they can be cheaper.
I'd love to hear that discussion. Can I hear that? Is there any way I can on demand listen to that discussion?
Okay, so my basic premise is flow's great as long as it's not high volume, because you're going to run out of your flow runs, and it's not business critical. Because if it fails, it's really hard to figure out where it's failed, and you can't fix it. Where if I go to logic apps, if it's mission critical or it's high volume, it's going to be cheaper. And also, I've got all the tools. So if a logic app fails, the error handling's better, and I can maybe push messages onto maybe a service bus queue to store that data. And I can set up things like Azure Monitor and Azure Sentinel. And Azure Sentinel allows you to have automated fixes run. So I can say, this is flagged. I can alert into my into ServiceNow or something else, whichever tool I'm using to monitor my systems in IT. And I can I can trigger automation into fixing things. So I get a self-repairing system. Whereas Flow, I can't do that. If it fails, it fails. You may get an email that lets you know, oh, your Flow's failed 5 times this week. Great. What happens next? So this is why I tend to have and although Flow is pretty reliable now, you will get failures. Especially if you
even with the dashboards in the admin center, is that it? They're
24 hours old.
Not sufficient to be able to.
They're 24 hours old, and don't tell you which ones fail. So then you have to go find the flow run history. Then do I resubmit it? If I resubmit it, there's no key to say I've resubmitted that. And it actually creates a new flow run. So you have to. How do I manage that? How do I know which ones I've rerun and which ones I haven't? Fortunately, it's a lot more reliable.
I'm glad somebody with a lot more experience than me is having issues, because I have issues and I'm barely into Flow. Like I spent 4 hours yesterday trying to get a stupid file to figure out if the file already existed on SharePoint and overwrite it. I couldn't figure it out. I gave up. For some reason, the Flow would not read any files from SharePoint. Don't know why. It wrote it just fine, but it would not read and tell if there was a file there. So I was like, this is dumb. Why is this? And then I still can't figure out how to get the actual formula expression whenever there's a little formula. Half the time it works, half the time it doesn't. I don't know.
My biggest problem with Flow is where's all the history? I can't query it. It's in some Microsoft place. Whereas desktop flows, everything's in Dataverse. I don't know if you're aware of this. We have a flow sessions table. We can query it. We can look at it and do really great things and report on it.
Yes.
What?
It's so frustrating that the cloud flows are not in that flow sessions. Yeah. It's like every time I see that table, I'm like, why? Because it would be so nice if we could just like classic workflows, right? That was what was so nice about classic workflows, is that you could just have that view and see when things are in the waiting state, and they've got an error and all those kind of things.
I look at a lot of the systems I wrote. I create a dashboard with loads of different views on system jobs. So okay, if you see something in this table, you need to fix it. You need to have a look at it or flag it up to somebody. I actually created some flows to fix manually run flows to fix flows. So just run this workflow to fix it. If that's happened. And I built self-repair. So I built self-repairing workflows. But doing those same patterns in Cloud Automate, Cloud Flows, is really hard, because you end up, the error handling isn't as clever. You have to do the configure run after a branch, and you end up with a flow that's so huge, it's unmanageable. Although we can use scopes and things like that. And again, we talk about this. I did talk a lot about error handling in the RPA one, we talked about Cloudflow, so we can then compare it to desktop flows. So although it's in the exam as error handling, they don't go that far. They don't say, okay, how do I do it in Cloudflows? How do I do it in desktop flows? It's different. What strategy do I use? It's massively frustrating.
Yeah. So you're not a fan then?
Well, my catchphrase at the moment, pretty much every session I do, is Microsoft's consistency is their inconsistency. It's even
and always renaming.
It's even like things. If I want to share a Cloudflow with a user, who do I share it? Do I share it as the owner or the co-owner? It's the opposite way around for desktop flows. One's a co-owner, one's an owner. Why? Why can't they be the same? It grates.
Yeah. So do you think that people do one of your study groups on Power Automate Cloudflows, and they come out the other end thinking, never going to use them. I'm only going to ever use logic apps.
I think sometimes I do like to tell it how it is. I don't want to paint the rosy picture, because that's what the Microsoft courses do. And Learn does. It's the rosy, simplistic view. This is all wonderful. It's all easy.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Of course, yeah. So frustrating.
Again,
but
I talked about retry. Yeah, we have to cover retry. Why do I need to do retry in flows? Why do I need to handle that? Oh, so go. Yeah, why? What could cause that? And I go into that. And you have to again understand flow limits, API limits, and things like that, don't you? To do it properly, you soon hit those if you're not careful.
Yes. Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah. And they're not easy to understand, are they? Because everybody gets confused between the service protection limits and the API limits. And even I do have to look it up.
Yeah,
everything's great until it's not all of a sudden.
Yeah. That's what I say. You work happily, then suddenly happens, and then suddenly the flow that you wrote falls over. Because you end up, I always say when I used to write classic workflow, I used to write it defensively. The first half of my classic workflows was a load of if this, then stop, if this, then stop, if this, then stop. And I also built self-repairing workflows. They would, okay, this has failed, start another workflow to process on. I can't really do that with Cloudflows. It just isn't the same. Yeah. I wish we had better error handling, better logging to see what's going off. Having to add steps into log.
So in addition to the logging, better monitoring of logic apps, what other areas and better, I guess, better error handling in that respect? What other kind of areas do you find that logic apps really is easier to use than cloud flows?
Well, I can trigger functions really easily. I mean, I've got access to all those Azure services that just hook in. I can put things and just triggering them in different ways. I could trigger a logic app off a message in the service bus. That was one of my classic models. You paste to a bus, and you post to a bus, and then the logic app runs, or an Azure function runs. And the fact that you can write logic, both functions and logic apps with different code. I can write C#, or I can write JavaScript, or I can even run PowerShell if I want. It just opens up more opportunities. You run an Azure automation job, which is so cool, and start up VMs and do other things. A lot of people think Azure is just virtual machines. I never touch virtual machines in Azure. I don't touch any of the infrastructure as a service stuff. That's horrible, alien networking. But the PaaS side in Azure is brilliant. All the, especially the enterprise architecture, so much from the IoT to event hubs. You can create some really great solutions, but very cheaply, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you get your data wrong and you spend $65,000.
Yes, unless you deal with mass quantities of data and you don't think about it and you're just deleting it and restarting it, deleting it and restarting it 3 times in a weekend with like 18 million to 30 million records. Yeah, don't do that. So Julian, we're getting kind of close to the end here. So we didn't even tell people where they go to like sign up for these things or where they go to see what's coming out next. Okay. We need to hit those up.
Okay, first thing, what I normally do is I post a poll on Twitter saying which one do you want to do next. So I normally put like, hey, these are 4, so I'll probably make a fundamentals or something else. And I'll post a link to that poll in my LinkedIn and on my blog. My blog gets synchronized into the Dynamics communities. So I'll post it there. So enough people hopefully can see it. But again, I don't publish it more widely. I probably should. And then I choose. I wasn't planning to do the RPA one this time, but everybody wanted it. It was like the number one. It was a relatively new exam. It was like, can we do this? Can we do this? Like, okay, let's do that one then. And I'll take my lead. But I get a lot of people asking me to do the Power Platform Developer or the Power Platform Solution Architect. I normally say no to those because they're so much of a bigger exam. They're very, very broad. I mean, the Power Platform Developer is really broad. I teach it. I teach it. It's a 5-day course, and even then, we're only scratching the surface of it. Because again, talk about something you talked about today. It's got the Azure integration. We've got APIs. We've got all the different ways of things. And actually, that course is really about comparing the different approaches. So, do I do it in JavaScript or do I do it in business rules versus do I do it in plugins, and understand? And for that, you really need to understand how it works underneath, which is actually why I quite like that course. It's not like the others where you do actually have to understand. But it'd take 3-4 months to do as a twice a week for an hour. It's not realistic. And the Solution Architect course, which actually is a very good course, I wrote it. Well, I know some of you, a number of you probably you contributed. A number of you contributed, but I actually did the writing of the text. That's a really good course, but it wouldn't work in a study group because it's about changing people's thoughts on changing from being a functional consultant to being a solution architect and getting you to think broader. So it's not really an exam course anyway. And I don't want to get people into that. It's too much for you couldn't cover the subject in an hour. So it has to be something that's going to work, is nice, relatively small, and not too broad to cover it, because otherwise it's going to take too long. So I'm going to do probably a bit of fundamentals, or maybe Power BI was a good one there. It's within scope.
All right, so they're going to watch your Twitter for what you're going to do next in the poll. Then after that, will you tweet out, "Hey, this is how you join. This is how you sign up," or is there some other long-term way of doing that?
So I have a Microsoft. Well, I actually use Customer Voice. So I have a Customer Voice form. This is cool. I used to use a Microsoft form, and I used to manually go read everything, download the file, then go add them in as a guest into my tenant, then add them into the team. And it used to take me hours. So now I have a flow that when you go in, you go submit to Customer Voice. So I'll post the link to the Customer Voice. You can apply. You fill in the details. It adds you to a spreadsheet. It sends you an email with a link to the team. I then use the Microsoft Graph connector, because although we've got an Azure AD connector, it can only add users. It can't add guests. There's no action to add a user, a guest user. So I call the Microsoft Graph with the HTTP connector. I then have to pass the JSON that gets back to extract out the object ID of the user. And then I go add them in to my team. And then I do a few other things as well to give them access. So it's now fully automated. I just sit back and all the emails go out, and I just set it all up. So that's cool. That's actually quite cool. And actually, it's an interesting flow. It fails occasionally. And what I found is adding somebody to a team will often just time out. And I noticed so I've had to change the retry policy I know it defaults 4 times. I've had to increase the retries a couple of times. It just times out. And I do need to add in a bit of validation of email addresses, because people seem not to be able to type .gmail.com. There's loads of gmail.coms and Gmail comma. People don't take care when they enter stuff in. So I need to add a bit of us. Occasionally I get those, so I just have to go fix those.
Maybe that's your kind of bar for entry. If you can't type your email address, then
you can't fill out this form correctly. I'm not going to help you.
I did have one person complain, because I go set the appointments up. So I set up the weekly appointments. And in Teams, I don't know if you know, when you set up an appointment, it emails everybody in the team. So I got accused somebody complained to me about me spamming him with the email invites. So I said, fine, solved. I removed you from the team. So no messing. Don't complain. It's not. I'm not going to bother. Yeah, I'm doing this off my own back. I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to answer and pander you up to little complaints about getting 8 emails about some.
And there's a lesson there, everyone.
Yeah.
Don't mess with Julian.
Yeah, I think they hit me when my, I wasn't caring too much at that particular moment. It was a yeah, stop spamming me. Well, I'm spamming you. That's not spam. That's not the definition of spam. And he says, surely you can send out one invite with repeating. I says, Teams doesn't work that way. Go away.
Well, Julian, I appreciate your time here. I appreciate all the exam stuff. And I guess it'd be interesting for people to maybe if you did a exam maybe a year ago, if you'd have the recording still available for them to go through and be able to kind of to trudge along through it. That would be. I have
got quite a bit. I have let occasionally people. I don't like to do it a lot, but I have had people say, because I normally remove people from the team after about 3 or 4 months because they should have done the exam by then. But occasionally people say, "Oh, okay, so I haven't had a chance to do it. I want to just revise it. I'll add them back in." And I have let occasionally people come back. The trouble is the exams change. I don't know if you know, exams are changed every year. There's a big review. Lots of things added and removed. And next week I'm doing the review for PL900 fundamentals. We're going to go through that. And hopefully I'm going to get removed Power Virtual Agents from it because it's just too much to cover alongside everything else, because we're going to have to cover Power Pages now. We're going to have to add that in. It's too much for one day. So people get, when I've talked to people, they get overwhelmed by just all the different things. So hopefully I'm going to remove some other stuff as well. But yeah, so the exams change. So anything that's over, I think over a year old is not worth looking at. You need to start again. But and the changes can be small, but sometimes they're quite significant. Like the sales exam now, it's changed. It got released at the end of September. It's a massively different exam to what it was before. There's loads of new things, lots more on the insights and sequences, and goals have finally gone. Goals are no longer in the sales exam. I want to ask a poll: who's ever implemented goals in sales? You? No, never.
I did a long time. I think it was in CRM4. It was when it was coming to
It came before.
It was in CRM4, wasn't it? Goals.
So we did it then, but since then you've learned your lesson and never done it again, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, because it's not just everyone was like, "Can it do this?" No, sorry, you can't do that. Can it do this? No, you can't do that.
Yeah, and it was in the exam up until September this year, which is just a joke.
Yeah,
it's out now finally.
Well, it's been deprecated for so long, hasn't it? Yeah. But it's they're still. I mean, are they going to ever disappear from the data model? I wonder. They're just going to be there forever and ever and ever.
Well, opportunity relationships. What's the other one? There's two which used to have before we had connections. There was opportunity relationships and contact relationships. They're still in there. They're still actually enabled for the salesperson role out the box. So they're there. I'm not sure things. Yeah, they've been gone years, but they're still there. They never delete anything.
Well, Julian, you've already mentioned your LinkedIn, your Twitter, and you mentioned a blog. We'll be sure to get those links from you. Well, how else can our listeners get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. I've noticed that now. People just contact me on LinkedIn, and I will eventually reply to you.
That's always good in the fullness of time.
Well, normally within a couple. I'm not on it every day because often within a day or so I'll reply to you. It's the best way.
Awesome. Well, Scott, that's how our listeners can get a hold of our guests. How can our listeners get a hold of us?
Well, Daryl, yes, you could email us at cast@xrmtoolbox.com or get us on Twitter, LinkedIn @xrmtoolcast. And we love to hear from you. It's been fantastic to talk to you, Julian, and to hear about your various different opinions and your immense knowledge of the platform. It really, it's been really interesting to hear all those little nuggets that you talked. And I think I can only encourage everyone to sign up and keep watching your Twitter profile.
Yeah,
agreed. All right, talk to you later, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you very much. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
This has been the XRM Toolcast with Daryl Labar and Scott Durrell. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com, tweet @XRM Toolcast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XRM Toolcast page.